Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jennifer, and I want to share an analogy with you today. If trauma happens in the context of relationship, especially in our formative years, it impacts future relationships. That's how we learn to relate to other people. And this can happen by observing relationships, observing our attachment figures and their relationship. And it can happen by how our caretakers interact with us in that relationship. So I have an analogy, and I'm wondering if I need to do a little warning and a few disclaimers with this analogy. When I'm in person with someone, I can be gauging how they're receiving it. And of course, I tailor the analogy to what I already know about their life. So I do need to use a swear word because any other word doesn't translate the metaphor properly. And then also, I'm going to give kind of an extreme case in this analogy, and of course, tailor it to fit you. So I want you to imagine that we're all gardens, and I'm going to tell you a story about a particular garden. So I want you to imagine and I'm going to use a mother and daughter relationship as the example, but of course this can be any relationship. It can even be our community or organizations or both parents or father, daughter, father, son. It doesn't matter. So you just apply it to you. But in this scenario, I'm going to use mother, daughter. So imagine a very healthy garden, this young woman, and this garden grew up in really wonderful circumstances, and she learned how to take good care of herself. And so she had all these beautiful plants growing and felt joy in that, felt safe to be herself. She had a beautiful little picket fence surrounding her garden so that she kept things out that she didn't want in. Her time was spent caring for her garden. And she felt joy and feeling that her garden was beautiful, and she didn't feel shame or guilt about that. And in her garden, it was abundant because she had so much nurturing and caretaking going on, because she had learned this when she was a little garden. She was cared for in this way. She didn't get any messages that she should feel guilty being in her garden or caring for her garden, or that her role and identity was to be in other people's gardens and caring for their garden or cleaning up their messes. She didn't get any messages like that. So she is full of joy and enjoying her garden. And like all healthy gardens in this analogy do, she would rest and sit on this beautiful hillside, and there's these apple trees, and she's under an apple tree, and there's just an abundance of apples. And all around her are other beautiful gardens, and they exchange apples over their fences. They share with each other, they connect. There's healthy attachment going on by connecting and sharing. So she's not alone. She's surrounded by other healthy gardens. And the way they share with each other and interact with each other is by sharing apples over the fence. And the apples are the abundant apples. She's already had enough to eat for herself, and now she has extra to share with others. So I want you to imagine that this garden decides that she wants a baby garden. And she has a little baby garden, and she keeps this little garden close to her garden because while it's young, it needs lots of protection and nurture and care, and gives the garden everything that it needs, but just the right amount, because as that garden grows, she's going to push back a little bit. You know, maybe the mother garden was at Home Depot and found all these beautiful plants and came back and gave them to the little girl garden, and she didn't like them. She could just say, no, I don't want those. I'm going to do my garden my own way. And the mother has to learn, as this baby garden is growing, that she gets to make those decisions for herself. But she just continues nurturing as this garden grows, and she teaches the same things that she learned as a young garden, that it's okay to feel beautiful and to love yourself and to care for yourself. And never did she teach this little girl garden that she should be in the mom's garden, cleaning things up or pulling weeds. Never. It's the way to interact with other people isn't to be cleaning up their messes or being in their gardens. It's that when you feel an abundance and joy and have plenty of apples, you exchange those apples over the fence. Now, of course, being the mother garden, she's still giving all the extra nurture and care that's needed. So the little girl garden learns to care for her garden, feel beautiful, enjoy it. She has her own little picket fence as she's learning that she can say yes or no. And imagine like some bully little gardens come and try to burst through the fence, and the mom teaches the little girl, you can tell them to get the hell out. This is your garden. And the little girl realizes, yeah, I don't have to let people come in and stomp on my garden. And this is normal and natural. And it doesn't come with any guilt or shame or feelings like she should have felt bad and let those people come in and stomp on her garden. No, of course not. She has them out. She closes her fence. And again, she learns to relate with other healthy gardens by sharing apples over the fence. So now we're going to imagine an unhealthy situation. And like I said, I'm going to go to kind of an extreme. Obviously, there's worst case scenarios than this. But we're going to pretend that the mother garden is a narcissist. So I want you to imagine that the narcissist mother decides to have a baby garden. At birth, that baby is snatched out of her own garden and plopped in the middle of the mother's garden. And as she grows, she learns, I've got to be pulling these weeds to get, little morsels of food or something in exchange, a little bit of love or something here or there, or to not upset the garden. And she learns her identity is to be doing work inside that other garden. And the mother teaches her this. Why aren't you doing this? I need you to do this for me. Regulate me, clean up my messes. And this is where I say the word shit, because shoveling shit in that garden, pulling weeds, shoveling shit. The narcissistic mother hasn't learned how to care for herself and regulate herself and is using the child to serve that purpose. So being born into a dysfunctional system like that, this little garden isn't even in her garden. And she is doing the work over there. Now she learns that this is her identity. And through repeated experience of relationship to get her attachment needs met, she learns what she has to do to get that little bit that feels like love, approval, nurture, safety, care, what she needs. And to get that, she needs to be performing properly. So what happens as this little garden grows is it's very normal to feel like that's your role in life. It feels very normal as she goes and has experiences with garden to garden that she's comfortable with gardens who are exploitive, are like, of course you should come into my garden and be doing work in my garden. And a normal person with empathy wouldn't want that. They would want you to, they would know that your own garden wasn't getting cared for if you're doing that. But it feels normal to play that role. And so she goes from garden to garden to garden, having these experiences and thinking life is normal, feeling like she's getting some sort of attachment needs met, because if she shovels their shit and pulls their weeds, she's getting some attachment needs met in these relationships, and it feels normal to her. But something also feels off. She's tired. She's exhausted. She's hurting inside and doesn't understand why. And this garden, okay, I'm going to be a little silly here. This garden decides to go to therapy. And her therapist says, what is the condition of your garden? And she's like, she didn't even know she had a garden. Life is you take care of these other gardens, and if you're doing a good job, they're going to be happy with you. And you're going to get the little morsels that you get that they'll give you if you do it just right. And it's hard to believe and accept at first, and takes a while, because many, if not all, of her relationships look this way. This is identity to her, that I need to serve this purpose of being in other people's gardens. I mean, they need me, of course, but the cognitive dissonance begins, and she realizes she is exhausted. Something feels off. It starts, and she really does begin questioning. And the therapist says to her, look over there. Look over. There's your garden. It's waiting for you. And she decides to begin the journey. And to do that, she has to leave these gardens behind, and they will protest. And then her empathy is going to get pulled on. Help, help. We're drowning in shit. How could you leave us here? Come back. And the journey might be really lonely to arrive at her garden. And maybe she goes back a few times. But then again, the cognitive dissonance, this doesn't feel right. I'm needing something I'm not getting. I'm hurting inside. So one day she decides, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to hear those voices calling at me. This is reminding me of a poem by Mary Oliver, The Journey. And the voices say, mend my life. But you have to continue on to find yourself. So she arrives at her garden. There's a little fence, and she creaks it open, and it's overgrown with weeds. But she starts pulling on them, and the ground is soft. They come right up. It's not as hard as she thought it would be. And she gets inside, and she gets to work. And she cultivates beautiful plants and takes care of herself. And butterflies start flying in over the fence. Sometimes she feels lonely and misses the attachment that she was used to, that she would get the little bit of approval and reassurance and then feel regulated again, because her nervous system learned to regulate that way, that's what attachment meant. And those apples aren't growing yet, so she doesn't really know what new relationship looks like. So she keeps working at it, and she works hard. And, sometimes she will hear them calling for her over, and she's determined to stay. She's learned enough now, and she's enjoyed the butterflies and some of the flowers. So one day she's sitting on the hill, and she notices she's under an apple tree, and she looks up, and there's all these apples, and she eats a delicious apple. And before she knows it, she looks out beyond her fence, and some clouds start parting, and she notices that she's surrounded by other beautiful gardens who are welcoming her and saying hi. And they want to share with her, and they want to share and exchange apples over the fence. So let's take the analogy a little further. So now you are in healthy relationships. You've got your fence. You are relating in ways that are sharing with others that isn't an expense to yourself. So you decide, maybe you fall in love with another garden and want your garden right next to their garden. Or we can think of all the gardens that are close to us in any of those relationships. And let's say things are going pretty well, and occasionally there's some weeds blowing over their fence, and it's really bothering you enough that you feel like, I need to speak up and say something, that this is really bothering me. So you share with this person, and if they were really conscientious, really cared about the relationship, you probably just need to tell them one time. You say, hey, it's the weeds that are blowing over. They're really bothering me. They're getting into my garden. Would you mind taking care of that and pulling those weeds? And the person would, in ideal circumstances. And let's say they don't. It kind of hurts your feelings because, like I said, this was really bothering me and that it was really important to me. And when does it become codependence? I can go into these analogies so deep when I have someone in front of me and we're talking about specific circumstances of, you've begged them to please pull their weeds. It's the 15th time. It's not weeds anymore. It's piles of shit that you're smelling that are blowing over. It is, you've given them books on gardening, and inside you, you're like, but they'd be happier too if their garden was beautiful. And so it's got to be the right thing. I'm doing this for them. I'm going to keep, teaching them and preaching to them and begging them and making therapy appointments for them and giving them books. And we got to use discernment and decide, how many times and what effort before you accept this is me trying to change another person that clearly doesn't want to, because this is a hard fact to accept, but everyone has the right to have their garden be their garden. Everyone has the right. So where's your power? It isn't in trying to convince and change them. It really isn't. Now, in healthy relationships, we do share with each other, and then we modify behavior, learn and grow. But what about when they don't? So your power is moving your garden. And maybe it's just a few inches, and then those weeds, blow on by and don't come into your garden. So I'll probably push stop on the video and think of more pieces to the analogy that I forgot to share. But I hope this gets you thinking about how important it is to care for your own garden. And if you are spending a lot of time in other people's gardens, I bet if you really think about it and look, your own garden is neglected. So you might have people, in Mary Oliver's poem, she said they're tugging at her ankles. And like I said, they're saying, mend my life. Yeah, that might happen when you come home to yourself. But you will have an abundance of apples and connect and relate to people in new and healthy ways. So thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.